I deleted it. I want to be clear about that before anything else, because the version of this story that makes me comfortable, the version where I'm the one who discovered something was missing, the version where I'm the victim of a system that hid things from me, that version would be a lie. I'm the one who did it. I sat at my desk on a Tuesday morning in January. I opened the archive management console. I located dispatch incident 47B, dated November 14th, 2003, and I executed a full record purge. Audio, metadata, CAD log entry, and all associated cross-references. I followed the procedure exactly the way it was given to me. And when it was done, I marked the task as complete on the work order and moved on to the next item in my queue. That's what I do. What I did. I'm a records systems analyst for Dauphin County's Office of Public Safety Administration. That title sounds more impressive than the work actually is. Mostly, I manage the digital archive infrastructure for the county's 911 dispatch center and its linked agencies, fire, EMS, and law enforcement. When records need to be migrated between systems, I handle the migration. When there are format conflicts, storage errors, or metadata corruption, I fix them. When something needs to be purged, expired retention holds, duplicate entries, test records that were accidentally committed to production, I purge it. I've held this position for 7 years. Before that, I worked in IT support for the Harrisburg School District. Before that, I was a database administrator for a medical billing company that no longer exists. I'm 44 years old. I have a degree in information systems from Penn State Harrisburg. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand that I am not a conspiracy theorist, I'm not prone to magical thinking, and I have spent my entire adult career inside systems that run on structure, on logic, on verifiable chains of data. What I'm about to tell you doesn't fit any of that, but it happened, and I did what I did, and the consequences are mine. The work order came in on January 9th, 2004. It arrived through the normal internal channel. Our office uses a ticketing system for all archive maintenance requests. Each ticket has a requester, a category, a priority level, and a description. This one was categorized as data correction, integrity, which is a designation I'd seen maybe a dozen times in 7 years. It's reserved for situations where a record exists in the archive that has been determined through some review process above my level to contain errors significant enough that the record's continued presence in the system could compromise the reliability of the archive as a whole. The logic being, a corrupted or erroneous record is worse than no record because it can be cited, referenced, relied upon, and its errors can propagate. I understood the logic. I didn't question it. That category of request always came from the same place. The office of the county administrator, specifically from a deputy administrator named Paul Lindeman, who handled interagency data governance. I'd worked with Paul on maybe 4 or 5 similar requests over the years. Usually, they involved duplicate CAD entries or records that had been created during system testing and accidentally left in the production database. One time, it was a batch of mislabeled audio files that had been assigned to the wrong incident numbers during a format migration. Routine stuff. Technical cleanup. Nothing that ever made me pause. The ticket for 47B was structured the same way. Requester, P. Lindeman, OCA. Priority, standard. Description, Incident Record 47B, November 14, 2003, flagged for full purge per data integrity review. The record contains critical metadata corruption, rendering it unreliable for legal or operational reference. Execute full purge, including audio, CAD log, cross-references, and associated PCR linkages. Confirm completion. I want to talk about what full purge means technically, because it matters. The dispatch archive isn't a single file sitting on a server somewhere. It's a relational database with multiple layers. The CAD log is the computer-aided dispatch record. It captures the call type, the timestamp, the units dispatched, the disposition, and the geographic data. The audio is the recorded 911 call and all associated radio traffic. Cross-references are links to related records, other incidents on the same date, supplemental reports, patient care reports filed by EMS, and incident reports filed by responding law enforcement. A full purge means severing all of those connections and removing the primary record plus its linked artifacts. When it's done correctly, the database reindexes and the sequence closes around the gap. If incident 47A existed and incident 48 existed, removing 47B would cause the archive index to show 47A followed by 48. No gap marker, no placeholder, just a clean sequence, as if 47B had never been assigned. That's not a bug, that's by design. The purge protocol was built to handle test records and system artifacts, things that were never supposed to be in the production database in the first place. When you remove something that was never meant to exist, you don't want a gap sitting there generating audit questions. So the reindex is automatic. It's a feature. I helped write the documentation for it when we migrated to the current platform in 2019. On January 9th, I opened the ticket, read the description, and began the purge. I pulled up incident 47B in the archive console. It loaded normally. I could see the CAD log. November 14th, 2023, 2347 hours. Medical emergency, cardiac event, Linden Road address in Hummelstown. 2 EMS units dispatched. 1 law enforcement unit. Disposition, patient deceased on scene. I could see the audio file. 911 call, approximately 2 minutes. Plus radio traffic. I could see 2 cross-reference documents. A patient care report filed by the responding EMS crew, and an incident report header from Derry Township PD. I did not listen to the audio. I did not read the patient care report. That wasn't part of my job. The work order said purge, and the category said the record had been flagged by a review process above my level. My job was execution, not evaluation. I've said this to myself many times since then, and the number of times I've said it has not made it feel more true. I executed the purge. The system asked for confirmation. I confirmed. It processed for about 12 seconds, longer than usual, which I attributed to the number of cross-reference documents, and then it was done. The record was gone. The index resequenced. 47A sat next to 48, and the space where 47B had been was simply not there anymore. I marked the ticket as complete, added a note, full purge executed per specification, all linked records removed, index verified, and I moved on. The next item in my queue was a batch of audio files from October that needed to be re-encoded for long-term storage compatibility. I worked on that for the rest of the morning. I ate lunch at my desk, a turkey sandwich and an apple, which I mention not because it matters, but because I remember it. And the fact that I remember something that mundane from that particular day probably tells you something about how my memory has reorganized itself around it. Everything from January 9th is sharp, unreasonably sharp. I remember the sandwich. I remember that the apple was a Honeycrisp, and it was slightly mealy and I was disappointed by it. I remember that the overhead light in my office had been flickering for 3 days, and I kept meaning to submit a maintenance request but kept forgetting. I remember all of it. And I didn't know yet that any of it would matter. The first sign that something was different about this purge came 9 days later. On January 18th, I received an email from a woman named Diane Corrado, who identified herself as an attorney representing the estate of Gerald Mast. She was requesting copies of dispatch records related to Mr. Mast's death on November 14th, 2023. She had submitted a formal records request through the proper channel and had received a complete response that did not include any record matching the incident she was looking for. She was writing to me specifically because the records office had told her that archive inquiries involving potential system issues should be directed to the records systems analyst. Me. I looked up the date. I looked at the index. I saw 47A and 48 sitting next to each other. And for the first time, I felt something shift. Not an alarm, not guilt, just a small, cold recognition. 9 days ago, I had deleted the record this woman was looking for. She was looking for a real incident, a man's death, an ambulance response, a 911 call, and it wasn't there because I had removed it. I replied to her email and said that a system review had identified certain records from Q4 2000-2003 as having metadata corruption, and that some records had been removed as part of a data integrity correction. I told her that if she needed documentation of the incident for legal purposes, she might contact the responding agencies directly for their independently maintained copies. I signed the email with my name and title. I was professional. I was helpful. And I now understand, participating in something I should have questioned. I forwarded the attorney's email to Paul Lindemann with a brief note. FYI, receiving external inquiry regarding purged record 47B. Directed requests to responding agencies. Let me know if you need anything further. Paul replied within 20 minutes. His email was 2 sentences. Thanks, Karen. Handled appropriately. That should have been the end of it. In a normal purge situation, a test record, a duplicate, a system artifact, there would never be an external inquiry because no one outside the system would know the record had existed in the first place. The fact that an attorney was specifically looking for it meant that 47B was not a system artifact. It was a real record of a real event that real people remembered and had professional reasons to access. And I had deleted it. I want to explain something about how I processed this, because I think it's important for understanding what came later. I didn't immediately spiral into suspicion. I didn't start pulling threads. What I did was what I've always done when something at work doesn't sit right. I compartmentalized it. I put it in a box in my mind labeled, "Not my department," and I went back to work. I had other tickets. I had deadlines. The archive migration from the old Intergraph platform was still generating compatibility issues, and I had a backlog of format conversion tasks. I stayed busy, and busy is its own kind of anesthesia. But the box didn't stay closed. It kept opening, usually at night, usually in the 20 minutes between getting into bed and falling asleep. That's when my brain does its unsupervised processing, and it kept returning to the same simple question: what was in the record? I hadn't looked at it. I'd had it open on my screen, the full CAD log, the linked audio, the cross-references, and I hadn't read any of it beyond the header data. I treated it the way I treated every purge task, as a technical operation on a data object, not as a document with content. And now the content was gone, and I was the one who had made it gone, and I would never know what it said. That bothered me in a way I didn't expect. Not morally at first. Intellectually, I'm a person who works with information. My entire professional identity is organized around the idea that data has integrity, that records are reliable, that the systems I maintain can be trusted. And here I was, the custodian of those systems, and I had destroyed something without knowing what it was, on the instruction of someone who told me it was corrupted, and I had no way to verify that claim, because the thing itself was gone. It was a perfect closed loop. The evidence of whether the purge was justified had been eliminated by the purge itself. February was quiet. I did my work. The attorney's inquiry didn't generate any follow-up. I didn't hear from Paul Lindemann about it again. I started to let it settle, the way you let sediment settle in a glass of water, not gone, but no longer clouding everything. Then, on March 3rd, I was doing a routine audit of the purge log. This is something I do quarterly. I pull up the system's record of all purge operations performed in the previous period and verify that they were properly documented, properly authorized, and properly executed. It's a quality control measure. I check my own work, basically. I pulled the log for Q1 2024. I scrolled to January 9th, and the entry for the 47B purge was not there. Let me be precise. The purge log is an automated system journal. Every time a purge operation is executed in the archive console, the system generates a log entry recording the operator, the timestamp, the record ID, and the authorization ticket number. This is not something I create manually. It's generated by the system at the moment of execution. It cannot be edited by the operator. It is, by design, the tamper-resistant audit trail that ensures every deletion is accountable. My purge of 47B on January 9th had not generated a log entry. Or more accurately, if it had generated one, that entry had since been removed. From a log that I, as the records systems analyst, did not have the permissions to modify, someone above me in the system hierarchy had accessed the purge log and deleted the record of my deletion. The deletion itself was now invisible. Not just the incident, my act of removing it was also gone. There was no evidence anywhere in the system that incident 47B had ever existed or that anyone had ever removed it. The only proof was in my memory, in the attorney's email, and in the ticket that Paul Lindemann had submitted. I went to check the ticket. The ticketing system showed no record of a work order from P. Lindemann on January 9th. The ticket was gone. I sat at my desk for a long time. My office is a small interior room on the second floor of the county administration building, with no window, fluorescent lighting, a desk with 2 monitors, a filing cabinet I barely use, and a small shelf with a plant that I water on Mondays. I sat in that room, and I looked at my 2 monitors, one showing a purge log with no entry for January 9th, the other showing a ticketing system with no work order from Paul Lindemann. And I understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that I had been used. I had been used to doing something that someone wanted done, in a way that couldn't be traced. And the machinery of untracing had been thorough enough to erase not just the record, but the record of the record's removal, and the authorization for the removal. I was the only loose end. Me and my memory. I didn't confront Paul Lindemann. I want to explain why. And it isn't cowardice, though I've spent enough late nights wondering if it is. I didn't confront him because the totality of what had been erased told me something about the capability of whoever was behind this. They had reached into 3 separate system layers: the archive, the purge log, and the ticketing system, and cleaned all 3. The purge log specifically required permissions that I knew for a fact were restricted to the system's root administration level. That level was managed by the county's IT infrastructure team, not by Paul Lindemann, not by the office of the county administrator, and certainly not by me. Whoever had done this either had root access or had someone with root access working with them. Either way, I was looking at something that was coordinated, authorized at a level I couldn't see, and designed to leave no fingerprints. You don't walk up to someone involved in that and say, "Hey, I noticed the records were cleaned." You don't do that unless you want to become the next thing that gets cleaned. So I did something else. On a Sunday evening in mid-March, I drove to the county administration building. I have after-hours access because archive maintenance sometimes requires off-peak system windows. I badged in, went to my office and sat down at my console. I wasn't there to search the archive. I already knew what I'd find, which was nothing. I was there to search my email. The exchange with Paul Lindemann, his original ticket notification, my completion confirmation, the attorney's forwarded inquiry, his 2-sentence reply, all of that had been conducted through the county email system. I opened my sent folder and searched for Lindemann, 47B, Linden Road, and Purge. Nothing. Every email in that chain was gone. Not in my deleted items, not in my archive folder, not recoverable through any search parameter I tried. My email history for January 9th showed a gap. Emails at 8:14 a.m. and then nothing until 11:52 a.m. A span of nearly 4 hours during which my inbox and outbox were completely clean. I knew for certain I had sent and received multiple messages during that window, because I always do. It's the busiest part of my morning. All of it. Gone. I searched for the attorney's name. Diane Corrado. Nothing. The email she'd sent me on January 18th, my reply, my forward to Lindemann, his response. Every trace of that exchange had been erased from my account. I closed my email and sat in my dark office and listened to the building. It's an old building. The HVAC system makes sounds at night that you don't hear during the day. Clicks and hums and occasional deep groans from the ductwork. I'd worked late enough before that these sounds were familiar. But that night they bothered me. Not because they were different, but because I was different. I was sitting in a building that housed the systems I had maintained for 7 years, and those systems had been turned against me, not violently, not threateningly, but seamlessly and silently, the way a river erases a footprint. No trace, no resistance, just gone. I left the building at around 8 p.m. I drove home. I fed my cat. I opened a beer, sat on my couch, and did something I hadn't done since college, which is that I wrote down everything I could remember about 47B on a legal pad. Not the content of the record. I'd never read it, but the metadata. The date, November 14th, 2023. The time, 23:47. The address, Linden Road, Hummelstown. The call type, medical emergency, cardiac event. The responding agencies, County MS, Derry Township PD. The disposition, patient deceased on scene. The deceased's name, Gerald Mast. The attorney, Diane Corrado. The requester, Paul Lindemann, Office of the County Administrator. The authorization category, data correction, integrity. That legal pad became the first page of what I now think of as my parallel record. I keep it in a lockbox in my bedroom closet. It has grown considerably since March. In April, something happened that moved this from the category of disturbing institutional event into territory I don't have professional language for. I need to back up slightly. My office, as I mentioned, is on the second floor of the county administration building. The dispatch center itself is in a different wing of the same building, separated by a secured corridor. I don't work in the dispatch center. I don't interact with dispatchers in the course of my normal duties. My work is with the data after it's been committed to the archive. I'm downstream of the live operation, but the building is shared, and the break room is shared, and the parking lot is shared, and over 7 years you get to know people by face and first name, even if you never work together directly. There's a dispatcher named Helen whom I'd spoken to maybe 24 times, always in the break room, always brief and pleasant. She's in her late 50s, has been with the center for over 20 years, the kind of person who's part of the building's identity. In early April, I ran into her in the break room on a Wednesday afternoon. She was sitting at one of the small tables with a cup of coffee, and she looked tired. Not just shift tired, something deeper. I sat down with my own coffee, and we exchanged the usual pleasantries, and then she said something that made my hands go still. She said, "Do you ever get the feeling that there are calls that come to the center that don't go where they're supposed to?" I asked her what she meant. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she'd been thinking about a call from November, and she couldn't find any record of it, and she was starting to wonder if she'd imagined it. She said she remembered the call clearly. A woman's voice, very calm, reporting a medical emergency on Linden Road. She said the voice hadn't sounded right. Not upset, not emotional, not the way people sound when someone they love is dying on the floor. She said it sounded like someone reading from a card. I didn't tell her what I knew. I want you to understand what that cost me, because Helen was sitting there doubting her own memory, wondering if 20 years of experience had started to fail her, and I had the answer. I had the truth. I could have said, "You're not imagining it. That call was real." I deleted it in January. Rye and someone erased every trace of my deletion. I could have given her that. Instead, I said, "That sounds frustrating," and I changed the subject, and 5 minutes later I went back to my office. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself that if whoever had orchestrated this was capable of scrubbing records across multiple system layers, then drawing Helen into it would only put her in a position she couldn't handle and couldn't benefit from. I told myself all of that, and some of it was even true. But the deeper reason, the one I didn't admit to myself until weeks later, was that I was afraid. I was afraid that if I said it out loud, if I confirmed to another person that 47B was real and that I had personally destroyed it, then I would become someone who had done something. As long as I kept it inside, it was still abstract, still deniable, even to myself. Still something that might have an explanation I hadn't thought of yet. That excuse died in April 11th. A Thursday. I was at home in bed around 11:30 p.m. Not asleep yet. My cat Biscuit was on the foot of the bed, and I was reading a novel. Something forgettable, I don't remember the title. My phone rang. Not my cell phone. My landline. I should explain that I still have a landline because I live in a part of Susquehanna Township where cell service is unreliable. And I grew up in a house with a landline, and there's a comfort in having a phone that doesn't need to be charged. It's a cordless handset, nothing fancy, and it rarely rings because almost nobody has the number. I picked it up. There was silence. Not dead silence, but the particular silence of an open line. Background hiss. The faint electrical texture of a connection that's live but carrying no voice. I said hello. I said it again. Nothing. I was about to hang up when a woman's voice said, and I need to get this exactly right because I've replayed it in my mind hundreds of times. She said, "The address is 4410 Linden Road." That was the address. Gerald Mast's address. The address from Incident 47B, spoken to me on my landline at 11:30 at night by a woman whose voice I did not recognize. I said, "Who is this?" The line went dead. Not a click, not a hangover of static, just immediate clean silence. I checked the caller ID. It said unavailable. I stood in my bedroom holding the phone, and my heart was going so fast I could feel it in my throat. And Biscuit was looking at me from the bed with that half-alert expression cats get when they know something is happening, but haven't decided if it's their problem. I called the number back. You can't call back unavailable, but I tried anyway, hitting redial, and got nothing. I picked up my cell phone and searched for 4410 Linden Road, Hummelstown, Pennsylvania. The search returned a residential listing. The current owner was someone I didn't know. The house had been sold after Mast's death. I didn't call. It was midnight. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I wrote down exactly what had happened. The time, the voice, the words, the caller ID display, on a fresh page of my legal pad. Then I lay in bed until about 4 a.m., not sleeping, trying to assemble a rational framework around what had just happened. Someone knew my home number. Someone knew I was connected to 47B. Someone had spoken the address to me in a voice that, now that I replayed it, had the same quality Helen had described. Calm, measured, not emotional. Like someone reading from a card. I went to work the next morning after 2 hours of sleep. I did my job. I ate lunch at my desk. I attended a meeting about the Q2 archive maintenance schedule. I functioned. And then, at about 3 p.m., I did something I probably shouldn't have, but I'd been thinking about it all day, and I couldn't do it. I searched for Gerald Mast. Not in the dispatch archive. I knew that was empty. I searched publicly. Online obituaries, property records, and the Derry Township police blotter. His obituary was brief. Gerald Mast, 76, of Hummelstown, passed away on November 14th, 2023. No surviving spouse. Survived by one nephew. Services were private. That was it. No cause of death listed, which isn't unusual for a short obituary. The property records showed the house had been sold in January 2024 to a couple from Hershey. Nothing remarkable. The police blotter for Derry Township on November 14, 2003, listed several items. A DUI stop, a minor traffic accident on Chocolate Avenue, a noise complaint on Linden Road, which I recognized as Incident 47A, and a death investigation at a Linden Road address. The blotter entry for the death investigation was a single line. Officers responded to a report of an unresponsive male. The individual was pronounced deceased. No foul play suspected. One line on a police blotter. An obituary with no details. A dispatch record that no longer existed. A patient care report that I had personally served from the archive. A police incident report that, based on what I now suspected, probably had its narrative section hollowed out the same way the rest of the records had been. This man had died, and the documentation of his death had been systematically reduced to almost nothing, and the only piece that had required my direct involvement, the dispatch record, was the one I'd been brought in to remove. Everyone else's records had been handled by someone else. I was just the person who handled the dispatch layer. I was a specialist. I had been deployed the way you deploy a tool, precisely, for a specific task with no knowledge of the larger operation. That realization was the thing that changed my relationship with all of it. It wasn't just that I'd been used, it was that I'd been used efficiently. Whoever organized this had understood the systems well enough to know that each record layer would require a different approach, a different person, a different authorization pathway. The dispatch archive required me. The police report required someone with access to the Derry Township system. The purge log required root-level access to the county IT infrastructure, and the email scrub required access to the Exchange server administrative console. Each of those is a different system, maintained by different people, with different security protocols. Cleaning all of them in a coordinated way, without any of the individual operators knowing about the others, that wasn't a cover-up. That was a project. That was planned, budgeted, and executed with the same methodical precision that I use when I'm doing a system migration. I started wondering who else had been given a work order. Some IT administrator in the county infrastructure team probably had received a ticket to modify the purge log. They'd done it the same way I'd done mine, as a routine task with no reason to question the authorization. Someone at Derry Township had probably received a similar instruction regarding the police report, each of us doing our small part, none of us seeing the whole picture, all of us creating a seamless absence where a man's death used to be documented. In May, I did something that scared me more than the phone call. I drove to Linden Road. It was a Saturday, late morning, overcast. I took Route 322 east and then turned south, following the GPS even though I didn't need it because I'd been looking at that address in my mind for months. Linden Road is the kind of road that exists in a lot of central Pennsylvania, semi-rural. Houses set back from the road on large lots, a mix of older properties and newer constructions, backed up against farm fields and patches of second-growth timber. It was green. May in that part of the state is almost aggressive in its greenness. I found 4,410. It was a brick house with white trim. There were new garden beds along the front walk. Fresh mulch, small plants I couldn't identify from the car. A different mailbox from what I imagined the original would have looked like. Signs of the new owners. I parked on the shoulder across the road and sat there with the engine running. I don't know what I expected to feel. Dread, maybe. Recognition. Some kind of resonance with the thing that had been erased. But the house was just a house. Brick and mortar and glass. Whatever had happened inside it on November 14th was not written on its exterior. Places don't hold events the way people do. That's what records are for. That's what documentation is for. And I had destroyed the documentation, and now there was nothing between the event and oblivion, except human memory. Mine, Helen's, whoever the EMS crew and the deputy were, and possibly whoever had orchestrated the erasure. I was about to drive away when I noticed something. There was a telephone pole at the edge of the property, right where the driveway met the road. At the base of the pole, partially obscured by the new mulch from the garden beds, there was a utility access panel. A small metal box, maybe 18 inches square, the kind that houses phone line junction points. It was open. Not dramatically, just unlatched, the cover hanging slightly ajar, the way it might if a technician had been there recently and hadn't fully secured it. I got out of my car. I walked across the road. I bent down and looked at the panel. Inside was what I expected. Junction blocks, wiring, the standard guts of a telephone interface point. But there was also something else. Affixed to the inside of the panel cover with a small zip tie was a laminated card, about the size of an index card, white with printed text. I read it. It said, Incident 47, B, Status Released, Containment Protocol, Terminated Reference, See Supplement 12C, County Archive. I read it 3 times. Then I took a photo of it with my phone. Then I closed the panel, walked back to my car, and drove home at exactly the speed limit, with both hands on the wheel and a feeling in my chest like someone had placed a cold stone behind my sternum. Containment protocol. Terminated. The word that caught me, that kept circling in my mind during the entire drive home, was containment. Not documentation. Not record. Containment. As if the record, Incident 47B, the dispatch log, the CAD entry, the audio, the patient care report, the police narrative, wasn't just a record of something that had happened, as if it were containing something. And now it was terminated, and whatever had been contained was released. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to talk myself out of what I was thinking. Because what I was thinking didn't fit in my professional framework. It didn't fit in any framework I had. Records are documentation. They're data. They describe events. They don't interact with them. A dispatch log can't contain anything except information. The idea that deleting a record could release something is not rational. It's not how systems work. It's not how reality works. But someone had placed a laminated card inside a utility panel at the exact address listed in the record I deleted. Someone who knew the incident number, who used the word containment, and who had determined that the protocol, whatever that protocol was, had been terminated. By me. By my purge operation on January 9th. I want to tell you about what happened over the summer, because it's the part that I have the hardest time fitting into any coherent explanation, and it's the reason I'm recording this now instead of continuing to keep it in my lockbox and my legal pad. Starting in late May, I began receiving phone calls. Not frequently, once every 10 or 12 days, always on my landline, always late at night, between 11 p.m. and midnight. Always the same pattern. I would pick up, there would be the open line silence, and then the woman's voice would say an address. A different address each time. The first one after the Linden Road call was on May 28th. The voice said, "The address is 7712 Birch Lane, Palmyra." I wrote it down. I searched for it the next day. It was a residential address. No news stories, nothing I could find connected it to anything. June 8th. The address is 203 Market Street, Middletown. Again, residential. Again, nothing in the public record. June 21st. The address is 1100 Spring Creek Road, Hershey. July 4th. The address is 88 Old Reliance Road, Schuler. Every 10 to 12 days, the same voice, the same cadence, the same flat measured delivery, always an address in the greater Dauphin County area. I wrote down every one. I searched for everyone. I drove past some of them. They were all just houses, some occupied, some vacant. Nothing visibly wrong with any of them. Nothing connecting them except that a woman with no name and no traceable phone number was reciting them to me in the middle of the night. In July, I did something I'd been avoiding. I pulled the dispatch archive for each address and checked whether any incidents had been logged there. 3 of the 7 addresses the voice had given me had corresponding dispatch records. Routine calls, a medical transport, a fire alarm activation, a welfare check. Nothing unusual in any of them. But the other 4 addresses had no dispatch history at all. Not a single logged call. Ever. In some cases, this was unremarkable. Some addresses just never generate 911 calls. But one of them, the Birch Lane address, was a house that had been built in 1987 and occupied continuously since then. 37 years of occupancy and not one 911 call. Not a medical emergency, not a false alarm, not a noise complaint. Nothing. The statistical likelihood of that was low enough to be notable, and I noted it. I started mapping the addresses. I bought a large paper map of Dauphin County at a gas station, the kind of map nobody buys anymore, and I pinned it to the wall in my spare bedroom, which I use as a home office. I marked each address with a red dot, including 4410 Linden Road. 8 dots in total by mid-July. They didn't form an obvious pattern. No circle, no line, no geometric shape. They were scattered across the county, as if placed randomly. Then, on a night in late July when I was sitting in front of the map with a glass of wine, I noticed something. The dots were not random. They were clustered around gaps. Let me explain what I mean. If you looked at the map and ignored the red dots and instead looked at the spaces between them, those spaces corresponded roughly to areas of high institutional infrastructure density. The County 911 Center, the Hershey Medical Center, the Middletown Emergency Services Complex, the State Police Barracks on Lindell Road. The dots were positioned around these facilities. Like, and I know this sounds irrational, but I'm describing what I observed, like perimeter markers. Like the edges of a boundary being drawn around the county's emergency response infrastructure. I don't know what that means. I need to say that clearly. I'm not presenting a theory. I'm telling you what I observe. And I'm telling you that it disturbed me in a way that was different from everything else, because it suggested that whatever was happening was not random, was not accidental, and was not confined to a single incident involving a single dead man on Linden Road. It suggested a scope that I couldn't process. August was when I decided to find the EMS crew. I knew from the CAD header, the one I'd seen before deleting it, that County EMS had been dispatched to 47B. I didn't know which crew, but the County EMS system operates out of a limited number of stations, and the Hummelstown area is served primarily by Station 89. I started going to the diner on Main Street in Hummelstown on Saturday mornings because I'd heard that some of the medics ate breakfast there after their night shifts. It took 3 Saturdays. Her name, and I'm not using her real one, was Nora. She was a paramedic, late 30s, solid build, the kind of tired that lives in your face permanently when you've worked nights for a decade. I approached her carefully. I didn't mention 47B. I told her I worked in county records and that I was trying to resolve a data issue involving a call from November of the previous year. I gave her the date and the address. She put her fork down. She looked at me with an expression I recognized because I'd been wearing it for months. It was the expression of someone who has been carrying something they can't put down and has stopped expecting anyone to ask about it. She told me about the call, the man on the floor, the impossibly cold skin, the missing caller, the locked house. She told me about documenting everything, the temperature anomaly, the absent 911 caller, the secured doors, and filing it through the system. She told me about the attorney who couldn't find the record. She told me about going to the dispatch center and being told the record didn't exist. She told me about a meeting in which she flagged the missing record and was given a form letter about a system migration error. She told me she kept a composition book now, every call written by hand, because she didn't trust the system anymore. I listened to all of it, and then I told her the truth. I said, I'm the one who deleted it. The look on her face went through about 4 phases in 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, anger, and then something quieter, something that might have been relief, or might have been grief, or might have been the particular expression of someone who has just learned that the conspiracy they feared was both real and more intimate than they imagined. She asked me why. I told her the full story. The work order, Paul Lindemann. The ticket that vanished. The purge log that was scrubbed. The emails that were erased. The phone calls. The laminated card. The map. I told her everything. It took about 45 minutes, and by the end, we were the only people left in the dining room. And the waitress was refilling our coffee cups with the pointed patience of someone who wants her table back. Nora listened without interrupting, which I respected. When I was done, she said 2 things. The first was, so when they told me it was a system error, you were the system error. She didn't say it with malice. She said it with the precision of someone who understands how institutions construct their lies by turning people into mechanisms and mechanisms into explanations. The second thing she said was, what was the voice on the phone? The woman who calls you. I said I didn't know. She was quiet for a long moment, nint, and then she said, The woman who called 911 from inside Gerald Mast's locked house. The dispatcher told me her voice was unusually calm, like someone reading from a card. We looked at each other across the table. The same voice. The woman in the house. The woman on my phone. The same cadence, the same unnatural calm. The same pattern of delivering an address and then disappearing. As if the act of calling, of transmitting the address through a voice on a wire, was itself the point. Not the emergency, not the response, the call. And now she was calling me, giving me addresses. One by one, every 10 to 12 days, Nora asked me if I'd checked whether anything had happened at any of the addresses after I received the calls. I hadn't. It hadn't occurred to me. I'd been so focused on trying to understand the pattern that I hadn't considered the possibility that the calls were predictive rather than retrospective. I went home that afternoon and searched every address again, this time looking for events that occurred after I'd received the call. I checked obituaries, police blotters, fire department reports, and news archives. At 7712 Birch Lane, Palmyra, the first address the voice gave me, on May 28th, a man named Howard Teague had died of cardiac arrest on June 2nd, 5 days after the call. He was 71 years old. He lived alone. The obituary was brief. No surviving spouse, survived by 2 nieces, at 203 Market Street, Middletown. A woman named Ada Pryor had died of cardiac arrest on June 14th. 6 days after the call, she was 78. She lived alone. The obituary was 4 lines. At 1100 Spring Creek Road, Hershey, a man named Robert Dim had died on June 27th. Cardiac arrest. He was 82. He lived alone. I checked all 8 addresses, including Gerald Mast's. Every single one. At every address where sufficient time had passed since the phone call, someone had died. Same cause, same profile, elderly, living alone. Cardiac arrest, same brief obituaries, same absence of detail. I was being given the addresses before they died. I need to tell you what I did with this information, because this is where I either become someone you trust or someone you dismiss. And I'm aware of that, and I've made my peace with it. I did nothing. I did nothing because I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call the police and say, "A mysterious woman calls my landline and gives me addresses where people are about to die of heart attacks." I couldn't go to my supervisor and say, "I think the dispatch record I deleted was part of a containment system, and now the thing it was containing is loose and killing elderly people across Dauphin County." I couldn't go to the press because I had no evidence that couldn't be explained away. Cardiac arrest in elderly people who live alone is common. Obituaries are often brief, and coincidences happen. And underneath all of those rational reasons was a darker one. I was complicit. I had deleted the record. If the laminated card was right, if containment meant what I thought it might mean, then I had terminated the containment. Whatever was happening at those addresses was happening because of what I did on January 9th. Going public with that would mean admitting that I, Karen Aldridge, record systems analyst, had been the mechanism by which something was released. And I didn't know what that something was. And I didn't know how to stop it. And I didn't know if it could be stopped. September 2nd. The phone rang. 11:17 p.m. The voice said the address is 22 Hillcrest Avenue, Hummelstown. I wrote it down. I stared at it. And then I did something I had never done before. I drove there. It was nearly midnight. Hillcrest Avenue was a quiet residential street 4 blocks from Linden Road. The houses were small, well-maintained, the kind of post-war construction that dominates the older neighborhoods of Hummelstown. Number 22 was a white frame house with a screened porch. There was a light on in a front window, a car in the driveway. I parked across the street. I sat in my car. I watched the house. I didn't know what I was looking for. A figure? A shadow? A woman walking up the driveway. There was nothing. The street was empty. The house was still. The light in the window didn't move. At about 12:30, I went home. The next morning, I called Nora. I told her about the address. I told her I wanted to warn whoever lived there. She asked me what I would say. I didn't have an answer. How do you warn someone? How do you knock on a stranger's door and say, "I believe you may die of cardiac arrest within the next week"? Based on a phone call I received from an unidentified voice that has been giving me the addresses of people who subsequently die, Nora said, "What if we're wrong?" I said, "What if we're not?" She said something then that has stayed with me. If we go to that door, we're accepting that this is real. All of it. The voice, the pattern, the containment card. We're stepping out of the world where this might have an explanation and into the one where it doesn't. And we don't get to come back. She was right, and I went anyway, and she came with me. We went on a Thursday evening, September 5th. We drove to 22 Hillcrest Avenue, and we parked in the driveway, and we knocked. A man answered. Late 70s, thin white hair, wearing a cardigan over a collared shirt. He looked at us with the guarded politeness of someone who doesn't get many visitors. His name was Arthur Prevost. He lived alone. His wife had passed 4 years ago. He was a retired postal worker. He had a small dog, a terrier mix, who barked twice and then lost interest. Nora and I had discussed what to say. We decided the truth was impossible, so we'd use a version of it. Nora told him she was a paramedic and that we were part of a county outreach program checking on elderly residents who lived alone. She asked about his health. He said he was fine. She asked if he had a cardiac history. He said he'd had an irregular heartbeat diagnosed about 10 years ago, but it was managed with medication. She asked if he'd seen his doctor recently. He said he had a checkup scheduled for November. We stayed for about 20 minutes. He offered us coffee. He talked about his dog, whose name was Rudy. He talked about the Eagles season. He was a kind, lonely, normal man living in a house that a voice on my telephone had identified as the next address. Nora took his blood pressure. It was 148/92. High, but not critical. She recommended he call his doctor and get his appointment moved up. He said he would. We left. Arthur Prevost died on September 9th, 4 days after our visit. Cardiac arrest. He was found by a neighbor who noticed the mail accumulating in his box. The dog was alive, still in the house. The obituary was 5 lines long. I can't describe to you what that felt like. I've tried, in my legal pad, in conversations with Nora, in the silence of my own bedroom at 2 a.m. I can't do it. We had been in that man's house. We had taken his blood pressure. We had petted his dog. And 4 days later, he was dead. And the pattern was unbroken. And we had changed nothing. Nora called me the night she heard. She didn't say much. I could hear her breathing. After about a minute, she said, "It's not going to stop, Karen." She was right. The calls kept coming. September 19th, an address in Elizabethville. October 1st, an address in Gratz. The radius was expanding. The interval was the same, 10 to 12 days. The voice was the same, and every time I searched the addresses after the fact, someone had died. In October, I went back to the utility panel at 4410 Linden Road. The laminated card was still there, but underneath it, zip-tied to the same spot, was a second card. Same size, same lamination. It said, Incident 47, B, status released. Active propagation, 11 notice containment, C superment, 12C. 11 nodes. I had received 11 phone calls, 11 deaths. Whatever system of documentation this card was part of, it was being updated. Someone was tracking the propagation. Someone knew exactly how many addresses the voice had given me, which meant someone knew the voice was calling me, which meant someone understood the mechanism, the voice, the addresses, the interval, the deaths, and was monitoring it. And they were not stopping it. They were counting it. I stood at the base of that telephone pole on a cool October afternoon, and I felt for the first time the full weight of what I was inside of. This was not a cover-up. A cover-up implies that someone did something wrong and is hiding it. This was something else. This was a system as structured and maintained as the dispatch archive I managed, that had protocols, designations, supplements, and status fields. A system designed to track something that shouldn't exist but does. A system in which Incident 47B was not just a record but a component, a functional element, a containment mechanism, and I, following a fraudulent work order, had removed that component. And now the thing it was containing was propagating through Dauphin County, address by address, death by death, and the system's response was not to intervene, but to document the spread. That's what Supplement 12C is. I believe that. I believe there is a document somewhere, maybe physical, maybe digital, maybe in a system I don't have access to, that describes the containment protocol for whatever 47B was holding. And I believe that document includes a section on what happens when containment fails. And I believe that section describes exactly what I've been witnessing: the voice, the addresses, the pattern, the deaths. It's not an emergency. It's a known failure mode. It's been anticipated, it's being monitored. And no one is stopping it because the protocol says, I believe, that it can't be stopped. Only contained. And containment requires a record. In November, on the first anniversary of Gerald Mast's death, I made my decision. I didn't make it because I'm brave. I made it because the alternative, continuing to receive the calls, continuing to write down addresses, continuing to search obituaries, and find the names of dead people I could have warned but didn't know how to, was becoming a kind of death of its own. I was hollowing out. I was going to work, performing my job functions, eating my sandwiches, and watering my plant, and all of it was happening on the surface of a person who was, underneath, keeping a count of addresses, a count of names, a count of days between the call and the death. I decided to rebuild 47B. I don't mean I decided to reconstruct the original record. I couldn't. I'd never read it, and the source data was destroyed. What I decided was to create a new record, a new incident, 47B. To enter it into the dispatch archive myself, using my administrative access, and to populate it with everything I had: the date, the time, the address, the call type, the responding units, and the disposition. I couldn't recreate the audio of the original 911 call, but I could create a record in the real system with the real designation, indexed at the correct position between 47A and 48. Nora thought I was crazy. She said the moment I created an unauthorized record in the dispatch archive, I would be fired. She said it would be visible in the system logs. She said Paul Lindemann or whoever was above him would see it immediately, and it would be purged again within hours, and this time they would come for me, not just my data. She was probably right about all of that. I did it anyway. On November 14th, 2024, at 11:47 p.m., exactly 1 year to the minute after the original call, I logged into the archive console from my office and I created Dispatch Incident 47B. I used every piece of metadata I had written on my legal pad. I assigned it the correct sequence position. I entered the CAD data. I marked the disposition as patient deceased on scene. In the notes field, the free text field where supplemental information can be appended, I wrote everything. Gerald Mast, the cold skin, the missing caller, the woman who didn't exist, the addresses, the deaths, the containment card, the laminated supplement reference, the phone calls, my name, Nora's name, all of it. I committed the record to the archive. The system accepted it. The index resequenced. 47B appeared between 47A and 48, exactly where it had been before I destroyed it. I logged out. I sat in my chair, the overhead light that had been flickering since the previous January. I had never submitted the maintenance request, and at some point it had become a kind of talisman, a small constant reminder of the day everything started. Flickered twice and then held steady. My landline rang 4 hours later. 3:47 a.m. I was at home, awake, waiting. I picked up. The open line silence, the electrical hiss, and then the voice. But it didn't say an address. It said containment restored. And the line went dead. I haven't received a call since. I'm counting, almost 5 months. The interval was 10 to 12 days. 5 months of silence. I check the obituaries every morning. I check the addresses on my map. Nothing. The pattern has stopped. The propagation, if that's what it was, has ended. The record is still in the archive. I check it every week. 47B sits between 47A and 48, exactly where it belongs. No one has deleted it. No one has contacted me about it. Paul Lindemann retired in December. I heard this through the office. His position hasn't been filled. The ticketing system has been migrated to a new platform. My access levels haven't changed. I don't understand what I did. I don't understand how a record in a database can contain something. I don't understand how deleting it released something, or how recreating it restored containment. I don't understand the voice, or the addresses, or the deaths, or the laminated cards, or Supplement 12C, which I have never found and suspect I never will. I don't understand any of it. But I understand this. The record is the container, not the data in it, not the metadata, not the audio, not the cross-references. The record itself, its existence in the system, its designation, its position in the sequence, is the mechanism. 47B is not documentation of an event. 47B is the containment. It always was. I still water my plant on Mondays. I still eat lunch at my desk. I still do my job processing tickets, migrating data, and maintaining the archive. But I maintain it differently now. I maintain it the way someone maintains a levee, not as infrastructure. As a barrier, I don't know what's on the other side of the records in my system. I don't know which ones are just data and which ones are holding something in place. I don't know if 47B is the only one. I suspect it isn't. Every week, I check the sequence, 47A, 47B. 48, I make sure the record is intact. I make sure nobody has submitted a work order to purge it. And I have made one change to my standard operating procedure. When a purge ticket comes across my desk, any ticket for any record, from any requester, I open the record first. I read it. I listen to the audio. I look at the cross-references. I do the thing I didn't do on January 9th, the thing that might have prevented all of it. I look at what I'm being asked to destroy before I destroy it. And if anything about it looks like 47B, if there's a designation that feels weighted, a gap in the sequence that feels deliberate, a record that seems to exist for reasons the metadata doesn't fully explain, I don't touch it. I close the ticket, I mark it as unable to complete, record integrity review pending, and I leave it exactly where it is. Because some records are not records. Some records are walls, and I am never going to tear one down again without knowing what's behind it. That's what I have. That's all of it. My name is Karen Aldrich, and I'm the one who deleted Incident 47B, and I'm the one who put it back. And I'm going to make sure it stays.